What about innocent children? What about, just imagine in your mind's eye, 50,000 innocent little children lined up in front of a mass grave and just shot to death, and many of them buried alive. You think that's shocking? You think that didn't happen? Well, my guest here today, Kevin Annett, will tell you the whole story behind this in the next hour. Incredible story, and it's awakening people across not only this continent of North America, but it's gaining worldwide attention. So welcome to the show, Kevin. Should we call you Reverend Annett, or?
No, Kevin is fine, thank you.
What a story, and I love your website. I've been watching that. I've been sharing your website with, oh golly, dozens, if not maybe hundreds of people over the years, last couple of years in particular. A lot of people are kind of, well, it's up in Canada, it doesn't affect us too much down here, and, so what? They're just drunken Indians, almost like the attitude. And I can't believe that attitude. I really cannot believe that attitude, because if it happens to our Indian brethren, it's going to happen to us eventually too. I mean, we the people are just nothing but sheep to these elite people. So tell us your story, from much as you can tell us in a Reader's Digest condensed version here. It's a huge story, but continue.
Well, it began for me, thank you first of all for having me on, I appreciate it. These days there's such a censorship on this as we're uncovering graves that it makes a lot of difference to have access to the public through your kinds of programs, so I do appreciate it. It started for me almost 20 years ago on the west coast of Canada. I was a newly ordained minister in the United Church. That's the largest Protestant church in Canada. And I went with my young family out to the west coast of a place called Port Alberni on Vancouver Island, which traditionally had been a site of a lot of missionary activity, including by my church. It had been Presbyterian and Methodist, a lot of Catholic missionaries in the area. And I knew vaguely, like most white Canadians, I knew vaguely, about a lot of natives had died in that, but I never knew the details. The first week I was in my new church, I noticed right away that there was no native people in the church or in any church, and it struck me as odd because about a third of the local people were native. And I asked somebody about it, and they were very defensive, and they said, well, everybody keeps to themselves around here, you better not, kind of look into this stuff. I was encouraged not to ask those kinds of questions, but interestingly, that first week I got a request from a local native man to come out and perform a wedding at his house, which was out on the reservation about 100 yards from the former residential school run by what was at the time my church. And these residential schools were set up by law over 100 years. They operated. All the mainline churches operated them with the government funding and their own funding. And I didn't know at the time that half of these children had died in these schools, about, like you say, over 50,000 kids. But at the time, the way I began to learn about this was through this one man. He invited me into his home. I performed a wedding, and we sat around after drinking tea, and I asked him, his name was Danny Gus, he was a native fisherman who was retired, and I asked him kind of naively why there were no native people in any of the white churches, and he didn't say anything for a while. He looked at me kind of oddly, and then he finally said, they murdered my best friend in their school there. He's buried in the hills up back. They beat him to death one morning because he asked for more food. And not all the white people know about it, and they don't want us in their church. And that for me, bang, that was like the first entry into this thing, and it never stopped after that. I heard these stories all over. I tried to get my church to take an interest. I was told to not listen to the stories, and in fact I was warned not to get involved in even looking into that. Finally, in a nutshell, what happened is after about 3 years, I was inviting native people into my church, opening it up. We began to hear a lot of these stories. But what caused the church to fire me and eventually throw me right out, defrock me, was I had found out there was a long history of the churches grabbing native land and then selling it off to various logging companies, mining companies for a lot of money, and that money never getting back to the Indians. So I wrote a letter about that. I was fired within 4 weeks without cause. The usual kind of attack they make on a whistleblower. They went to my wife and helped her pay for her divorce if she'd leave me. There was this whole kind of character assassination going on because I was uncovering something that hadn't been yet, which was the deeper story of these murders and that. And I've been doing that for the last 18 years, and eventually began to really get a result, because a lot of eyewitnesses came forward to confirm that these killings happened. The government 3 years ago was even forced to issue a formal apology, but now we're at the stage where we're opening graves, and that's the final stage of this whole campaign.
Oh, my goodness. Your website, and ladies and gentlemen, please take note of this. It's simply itccs.org. ITCCS, basically the International Tribunal into Crimes of Church and State. ITCCS.org. ITCCS.org. There you can keep updates. You can see the videos, the ongoing story. A great little video posted there is, there's Native Americans along with my guest today. They're in a press conference. My goodness, this story. No wonder they want it shut down. This changes so much, Kevin. The history books. I mean, this has got to be broadcast in big letters across every newspaper, every radio show, in my opinion.
Well, we've tried. When we in October, I was out in Mohawk territory. This is southern Ontario, kind of upper New York State area. Traditionally, is where the Mohawk Six Nations were, and we went to the oldest residential school in Canada. It was set up in 1832 by the Church of England, and my figures showed that over 40% of these kids died there through the usual reasons, deliberately exposing kids to tuberculosis, letting them die untreated, working them to death, starving them. I mean, all of this stuff went on rampantly. But we found a number of mass graves near the school, and we've been actually uncovering material, a bone of which has been positively identified now as the part of a thigh bone of a young girl, probably 5 or 6 years old. And so, the fact that the bones are now unearthing means the country can't deny this stuff anymore. They can't say that it was all accidental and all that. This is a massive crime scene now, and we're hoping that there'll be international human rights courts that will look at this stuff, because the Canadian courts have refused to all along.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you're already following along on this on the website that I said, scroll down and look at the November 9th, 2011 entry there. It's titled Mass Execution of Children Alleged. You see the prisoners of the church picture, these little ones. Oh, how special they are, little ones sitting there. And then read above it. Quote, my brother Rufus saw them take all those children and stand them up next to a big ditch, and then the soldiers shot them all, and they all fell into that ditch. Some of the kids were still alive, and they just poured the dirt in on top of them, buried them alive. This is an eyewitness, ladies and gentlemen. This happened allegedly in 1943, not in Nazi-held Europe, but in Brantford, Ontario. Land occupied by the Canadian Army. It is basic training camp number 20. Now, this story, folks, again, we're talking about schools run by church organizations, powerful church organizations. This did not just happen in Canada to the north. It happened all across America as well. Now, this is the story behind the story. I really want to get comments from Kevin on this, because this affects us here in Utah. I'm telling you, I've talked to Kevin yesterday briefly. The Intermountain Indian School, and this Navajo school in Utah, was commissioned by President Harry S. Truman in 1950. It was run by the Mormon LDS Church from 1950 till it was shut down, around the same time as this Brantford school in 1970. Why was it shut down? A lot of stories were coming out. The mainstream media ignored these stories. We're talking stories of sexual abuse, of experimentation, of horrific rituals being performed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a huge, huge story. Kevin, okay, I don't want to get ahead of the story here a little bit, but doggone it, this is not just a Canadian atrocity. This is an American story as well, right?
Very much. As a matter of fact, I've worked with a group called the Tamaki Law Firm in Washington, and they actually won the first lawsuit against the Jesuits this last year. Again, it was the typical kind of monetary compensation in return for which people are gagged. They can't sue the church or really talk about their story anymore. So I think it's often a step backwards when people go to court and to settle for these monetary things, because it's allowing the murderers to get off the hook. But nevertheless, this lawsuit actually compelled the Jesuits to admit that they had done these crimes. And to give you an example, I went to Rome over the last few years to confront the Vatican over these things. We've held protests right outside St. Peter's Square. One of the women who went with me last time, her name was Clarita Vargas, and she's a woman from the Colville Indian Reservation near Omak, Washington. And she said when she was a little girl, a teenager, she looked through the window. This was in 1971. And she saw the Jesuit priest with a newborn baby. Now, the mother was being restrained by nuns and crying and screaming. She had this baby because she'd been raped by a priest in the school. This priest was taking the baby, and there was a kind of very weird ceremony going on, and they were putting the baby alive under the floorboards of that school and sealed it there. And she went to the police. They wouldn't do anything. To this day, the Ken Bearchief, who's the lawyer who looked into this, he went to the tribal police, then the local police, and then the FBI, and every single one of them said the same thing. They couldn't do anything because the Catholic Church would have to give permission. I mean, when do you go to the suspected killer to ask permission to dig under their house to look for the graves of their victims?
Indeed. Kevin, let me give you a little bit of background history. On my blog, my website, I've posted a history of the Jesuit order, how it came from Spain, and I've traced the Spanish originators of the Jesuit order to Khazar Jews, that came out of, there's a diaspora, so to speak, out of Germany. They basically went directly into Spain, and there formed the Spanish Order of the Jesuits. The Jesuits came to the Americas, of course, in the 1500s, the 1600s. They had massive concentration camps. This is recorded history in the Jesuit records. They had these massive concentration camps, slave labor camps, for these Indians to work their mines through all of the Utah hills, the Midwest, even up into the Canadian Rockies, for heaven's sakes. This is well documented. This has been going on for centuries. Now, when Brigham Young came to understand this, ladies and gentlemen. Just because Mormons claim to be independent of Catholicism, they're not independent of the Jesuit order because of bloodline. Brigham Young was Jesuit Khazarian bloodline. Now, the Jesuits in Utah have always been very powerfully involved behind the scenes. You look at the Intramountain Indian School in Brigham City, you see the Jesuit order very much involved with the Mormon officiators there. So when we get into these atrocities, you understand that it crosses many church barriers and state barriers. Yes, it's Jesuit, but it's also, again, tied to, in the case of Kevin Annett's story, to Protestant churches as well. The infiltration of these Jesuits into all religions has happened. It's happened.
I should just mention, too, I very much agree that this was a whole strategy involving all the, Protestant and Catholic churches with the Crown of England and the Vatican. These were the main, kind of perpetrators of this mass genocide on this continent. And it's really important to know, another website people can go to look at all of my evidence of this is hiddennolonger.com. Because there we have a lot of documents proving the 50% death rate, the sterilization programs, the plan. It's got a lot of smoking gun documents in there showing that this wasn't just random priests abusing random kids, which is the spin the government and church always puts on it. This was a plan of extermination. And in my area alone on the West Coast, probably 95% of the people were killed off. That's the largest genocide in human history aimed at children. And we have to never forget that. And that's one of the reasons it's carrying on today. And I'd like to talk about that at some point. But it's hiddennolonger.com if you want to read the evidence.
Okay, hiddennolonger.com. That's along with the itccs.org. Two websites. Ladies and gentlemen, please spend some quality time getting a handle on this, and don't just keep it to yourself. Spread this information into your churches, tell your pastors. The Black Robe Regiment listening to this today, get involved with this. This is a huge, huge crime. It's been covered up just way too long. Now, in my personal research, Kevin, I've traced there's a huge Utah connection to an operation called Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II. We have people like Dr. Joseph Mengele suddenly making appearances in Utah, of all places. He was given a new nom de plume. He was given a new identity tied in with the University of Utah. He became a fixture in the early 1950s at the Brigham City Intermountain Indian School. Okay, now from that comes a Navajo individual who was eventually groomed and became a general authority of the Mormon Church. His name is George B. Lee. The story of George Lee is an amazing story. He comes out. He's being groomed as this general authority to the Native Americans, what Mormons call Lamanites, correct? Then he has a problem that surfaces. He's found molesting young girls. He's defrocked. He's publicly, banished from the hierarchy. His corporate accounts are all taken away from him, and he takes up residence in southern Utah. I got to meet him. I interviewed him. He is completely and totally mind-controlled. He has a handler. He had a handler at that point. I started to break through the mind control, finding out that he was a protege of Mengele. Okay, he was trained and experimented on by Mengele, and in a moment of clarity, he started to talk about all the atrocities he had witnessed at the Intermountain Indian School. I mean to tell you, this is a huge, huge story breaking here.
Yes, and it's important for people to know that it's very much tied into the way our society operates now. In the 1950s, a lot of the paperclip Nazi scientists were used in the CIA-funded MKUltra program, which was basically a form of learning how to control masses of people. The introduction of television, the creation of alpha wave brain waves through, the TV impulses. A lot of these things were experimented on first in Indian schools and hospitals. They used these Indian kids as the guinea pigs for testing out drugs, a lot of mind control stuff. We've documented this. We can't get into the records of these Indian hospitals where they went on because the government officially sealed all these records in 1999. We found the same thing in America. The Freedom of Information requests go unresponded to when people are trying to look into these programs. But definitely this has an impact today. And when you talk about child trafficking, we've documented how the networks that operate all across North America, a lot of it are situated in places like Indian reservations where under the law in Canada, under the Indian Act, Native people are not citizens. They're wards of the state. They're like children under the law, and they don't have any legal rights. They don't have citizenship rights when they're on reservation. So a lot of these kids go missing, and we've documented how Vancouver, right on the West Coast, is one of the largest child trafficking centers in the world. So, I mean, this is part of the legacy of genocide.
Ladies and gentlemen, the history of the Intermountain Indian School in Brigham City goes like this. During World War II, it was actually built as a hospital, then concentration camp, prisoner of war camp for Nazi prisoners. Now, many of the people that came into this, when the when the Nuremberg trials were going on and Operation Paperclip was in its full operation. This was basically a safe haven for these Nazis. They were kept there and being processed with the prisoners of war Nazis there in Brigham City. This is how Mengele came to be mainstreamed into the system at the University of Utah. There was a Dr. Hammond here in Utah issued a paper on this exposing Dr. Greenbaum. This was his name, Dr. Greenbaum, who was really Joseph Mengele. Now, in 1950, President Harry S. Truman, who was again fully aware of Operation Paperclip and the streamlining of the OSS into what's now known as the CIA, he understood fully what was going on. He was the one that changed the status of this federal base, this concentration camp, prisoner of war camp, to a concentration camp for primarily Navajo and Hopi children from Arizona. The history is absolutely stunning what happened. It's okay to take little children 5 years of age en masse from the Navajo Nation and the Hopi Nation and bring them up here for experimentation. Americans and people all over the world should be outraged with this story. So, the experimentation, the mind control, the shattering of the psyche, these experiments were done on these wards of the state, these non-persons, these dispensable children. Your comments, Kevin?
Yeah, and all of that is indicative of what I often say when I'm lecturing to white audiences is that when you grow up in a society and you don't see the way it operates, a lot of this can be shocking at first. But then when you look around and scratch the surface, all of the evidence is there. I mean, since 1996, I've been publishing these records showing the massive death rates. We've had hundreds of interviews. If you go to that hiddennolonger.com site and to our documentary film Unrepentant, which you can find on the Google search, you'll see the eyewitnesses talking and describing these things, being deliberately forced to sleep with kids dying of tuberculosis. That was a policy in residential schools here and in America for over 50 years. You don't separate kids when they're sick. You make them lie and and sleep together and work together, and as a result, they all die off en masse. And that's depopulation under the guise of education and religion. I mean, we know that went on, and now we have the physical proof, and now that the bones have been unearthed, we're starting a whole investigation across the continent, and we really need people's help to identify this. So people listening can play a role in coming forward, because we have to if we're concerned about our own safety and liberties.
America with this situation? Because I'm sure it happened here as well.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm going on a speaking tour in America starting in January, starting in the east and working west, because in a whole number of areas, the Six Nations area around the Great Lakes, among the Lakota people who I work with on the Pine Ridge and Rosebud reservations in South Dakota, and in the west, in a whole number of places in California, and hopefully now in your territory if we can find some interest. These people all asked for the same thing. They've said, we know there are mass graves in our areas. We finally need this brought out. So this international tribunal I work with, we're hoping to bring a lot of this evidence to Europe in the spring. There's interest in the European Parliament to have Canada and America indicted for genocide, and they need to look at a lot of this forensic proof and others. So that's one of the kind of longer-term goals we're doing. We know we can't work through the courts on this continent because they're all complicit in these crimes, and they're all protecting the state and the churches. So we have to go international, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this. So if people want to help out on this, let me just say that they can contact me. My email is hiddenfromhistory1, like the number 1, hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com, and I'd be happy to come to your area or any area and work with people who want to help bring this out.
Well, definitely, Kevin, we need to introduce you to some people I know on the reservation in Arizona, the Hopi survivors, the Navajo survivors. There's many of them. First of all, as you know, they don't want to talk about it. It's very horrific to them that have witnessed these atrocities. They rather just forget about it. And the problem that I've found personally is the the fallout from this, when people have witnessed it, they're much more apt to abuse alcohol. They're much more apt to, basically be angry and violent themselves, and many of them are shall we say, problem citizens in the Navajo Nation right now. So,
it's a tendency when you all over the among Native people across the continent. You find that, and it's why, like, if you look at the death rate, it's just as high as ever was 50 years ago or more in the Native world. A lot of the in Canada, the highest number of people killed in prison are right in Vancouver, and half of those are Native, even though they're only 2% of the population. So, I mean, this is kind of an ongoing assault, and I mean, unfortunately, what often white people see of Native is that, kind of destroyed condition. I mean, if you were never loved as a child, if you were never allowed to hold one another and just have normal relations, you're not going to have any kind of normal life when you're older. And one of the big problems increasingly in the Native world is drugs, of course. There's the HIV infection rate is highest in the Native world in Canada than any other group, and that's because of a lot of the drug use, needles and pipes and that. You see that all over, especially among young Natives. So, I mean, this is unfortunately an ongoing genocide.
It is. Kevin, I got to break. We have to take a break at the bottom of the hour. We'll be right back with more after these messages. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story behind the story. Don't go away. Host Dr. H. Rod, can you hear the drum beats? Can you hear the war drums beating? Boy, I do. I can hear them. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just tell you that I spent, at least 2 years in intensive research with Dr. Carl Hammond before he basically shut his mouth. He says, I can't continue to expose this. My life is in danger. My very existence can be wiped out. I advise you to do the same. Dr. Hammond was following through Freedom of Information Acts to find out exactly how this MK Ultra program was able to get perfected. You see, here's the problem, ladies and gentlemen. You got to understand it. To get the human mind, the human psyche, to split into multiple personalities, it must be traumatized. It must be tortured. There must be complete and total young people that are taken away from all contact with family. They must be isolated. They must have no hope. Then they must be tortured. They must be absolutely their mind must be forced to do what's called dissociate. Now, to get this system perfected in government CIA circles, which was directed by Mengele, a.k.a. Dr. Greenbaum, there had to be thousands of experiments done. Now, who did they do these on, ladies and gentlemen? Orphan, white, Anglo-Saxon children? No. Indian children in these residential schools. You're hearing today the testimony. 50,000 children in the 1940s during the war years disappearing. This is not ancient history. This is fairly modern, folks. This is what happened in Toronto in eastern Canada, but what was happening following World War II in America is absolutely sickening and disgusting for a number of reasons. Today we celebrate the 70th anniversary of the attack of Pearl Harbor. You know what happened after Pearl Harbor, Kevin? We had Navajos stand forward and come forth and become an integral part of the U.S. intelligence as far as code talkers. The Navajos were used in the Pacific and even in the European theater as codes. They would speak in their native tongues, and the Japanese and the Nazis had no idea how to break this. It was a native language. This is how we repay the Navajos, by taking their kids, their posterity, and experimenting on them in schools because they need to become more mainstream white. I'm telling you, I am incensed as an American today. This story behind the story has got to be told. Thank you, Kevin Annett, for your courageous pioneering of this story. And golly, we need more heroes like you, frankly. So continue on with your comments and your story.
Well, just hearing you talk, I realized, I guess, that movie Flags of Our Fathers. I don't know if you saw it. It was about the three guys who were honored as who had raised the flag at Iwo Jima. One of them, Ira Hayes, was Navajo. Or actually, he wasn't Navajo. He was from a smaller tribe in the area, but he was from your area. And what was ironic about the film was that it showed that he was honored and everything, but then he died of alcoholism, kind of forgotten and alone, like a lot of his people. And so it's kind of the story here on what Native people call Turtle Island or North America is, there's this whole other reality that you don't realize until you scratch it, and then you realize you've been lied to your whole life. This was aimed primarily at, like you say, in Native people, but it was also I should mention, so they're not forgotten, there were a number of other groups that were targeted too. I mean, in the MKUltra experiments, they did use white kids in foster homes. They used prisoners. They used military personnel. They used anybody who was vulnerable and could be controlled in that way. And you see the effects today. Like, I know that one of the areas I work in Vancouver, it's along the Skid Row area. It's called East Hastings Street. A lot of the people you see out on the street have definitely been through these programs, and speaking to them, you realize that this was a very widespread phenomena. Anybody who was in an institution was often grabbed and used in this way. So this is the way that we can let people see that the genocide, the natives are kind of like the canary in the mine shaft. They were used first, but this is aimed at all of us now, and I think that that's the way that we can overcome this tendency to say, well, that doesn't involve me, that was these unfortunate Indians, but it really doesn't have anything to do with my life. I think that's not true, and we're waking up to that fact more and more.
Well, MKUltra is still in use in so many ways. In the mass media, in utilizing specific what's called extra low frequency waves to basically hypnotize the mind control of the minds of the masses, Kevin. Mm-hmm. This is why the mainstream media is so flat out controlling today. Americans and people across the world really are being mass hypnotized. I mean to tell you.
Well, I realize that whenever I bring out information and there's no response, it's really kind of mind-blowing to me how, we have photographic proof now that there's children's bones that have been identified being unearthed in a mass grave run by the Church of England. Right up till the 1970s, and there's no media response. It's like there's nobody calling up in outrage. It's almost as if, murdered children, so what? That seems to be the response. Now, on the other hand, there is a real outrage by a certain minority of people in the alternative community, programs like yours, kind of in the freedom movement, people who realize that the Big Brother is not their friend. And, we have common law rights to ourselves and our identity and to this information, and the government doesn't have a right to withhold this stuff, or the churches. So those are the people. It's almost like there's a minority being really wakened up, but the majority are being put to sleep even more, and that's something I keep countering every day.
Oh, yes, it's so true. And so, I mean, I get this all the time, too, Kevin. People say, well, it's too far gone. They're too much in control. Hey, it's never too late. We're the silent majority. We, the people, are. And we got to awaken to their techniques and basically just stop the transmittal of these lies. That's why I have a radio show, ladies and gentlemen. You know this. I'm sure this is why Kevin is fighting his battle as well. He doesn't, there's no give up in Kevin Annett. You got to just join ranks and close ranks and, again, spread the story behind the story. This is really our only chance to derail this freight train, Kevin.
Well, also, I know that when I lost my family and my kids, and I see my daughters now, they're older, they're in their 20s now, and I explain a lot of this stuff to them. But when I lost, control of them and custody of them, and couldn't see them every day, and I had to struggle in poverty for many years, I realized, well, if I go under, they've won, and they, and I don't have the right to do that. I don't have the right to let down my children or myself or the people who count on me. So I think we just have to stay angry and stay aware and say, we have done nothing wrong. They are the criminals, the ones in power. Society is run by criminals and people with blood on their hands. So what I am getting, though, over the years, in the last 5 years even, I see a real awakening happening. And I just really want to urge people to realize that it's up to you. It isn't up to some leader or specialist. We all know the truth, and we all need to work together on this.
Well, Kevin, I really would. I know you've got other obligations, and you just been in for the first hour. So I want to just tell you that after again reviewing your website, a few months ago, I've been watching the story very closely. I had never really been to the Intermountain Indian School grounds, this old campus, just a few minutes from my home, literally. So I have a friend who, let's say he's got a gift of second sight, I guess is the best way to describe it. I've had experience after experience with him he should be on a police payroll, a forensics payroll, because he knows by seeing the spirits. I mean, he can see entities, and there's no doubt about that. Okay, so I called my friend up and said, "Do you have a minute to come and this is on a Saturday morning, take a walk with me?" Sure. He knew nothing about the history of this school. He had no idea that it even existed. We walked and went to the one building, walked in, and he went to his knees and just started, oh my goodness, there's hundreds of children in spirit here.
Yeah, we've had the same experience.
Dark.
We've used psychics on a number of our digs, and just a short story on that. The woman who was a psychic working with us at the Brantford School where we found these bones, I brought her a stone from the building of the school last year. She held it and she dropped it. She said, "I can't touch that. There's kids being sacrificed in the basement there. I see men in red robes."
That's exactly what he said.
Yep.
That's exactly what my friend said. I said, "What are you seeing?" And he's closed his eyes. He says, "People in red sacrificing these children."
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, and then over here there's others, children that are just holding up their hands to me because they're like their mind is being erased. He says there's mind control experiments on these kids, and then they're massacred to shut them up.
Yeah. And
I said, "Can you give me some names? Ask them who their names are." And so he rattled off their Indian names to me. I wrote a few of them down. I mean, my friend has been right on 100% in so many other areas. Now, I was thinking, well, he'll walk these grounds. He'll, if nothing happened, nothing happened. He didn't know the history. I knew the history, but I didn't know if I believed it or not, the stories I'd heard. Okay? But Kevin, I'm telling you, I was stunned.
It's the same thing happening, and really important to document this. If you can videotape this and start, documenting the stories. There's always a few who'll come forward and talk. So I hope that happens. I'd be happy to come down in the new year sometime and maybe work with you and others on that. Oh,
absolutely. We need to do it. The history. You review the one school that. A golf course was put over the mass grave, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what's happened here at Intermountain School. There's a golf course put over the one area. It was all basically given to the city of Brigham City by the school, and it's now a nice rolling golf course.
Well, the important thing to understand here is, they've covered it up over the years, but now we've opened the first grave anywhere in North America from a residential school. Well, now that we've done that, they can't close it up again. They have to address the issue. So we've had 3 other Native groups across Canada already saying that they want me to come and open up the graves there too. And in America, the same thing will start. So we just have to be persistent. It doesn't matter if you're just a few people. I mean, look what I've achieved in 18 years just working on my own. We can do it if we just keep at it.
How do you find out where the graves were? I mean, you just have to go to the archive somewhere?
Well, eyewitnesses. We had forensic teams looking. You can often tell graves because of the presence of sinkholes. the vegetation. An expert could come and look. You just find a forensic person at the local university, and they can come out. But we have actually people who can help that. We're putting together teams all over the place to work on this stuff. So it's pretty easy to identify the graves. Then it's just a matter of having the courage to go ahead and bring out the remains and have them analyzed, as we're doing right now.
Well, and trying to find the history of this camp. Again, here was a prisoner of war camp for Nazis, for heaven's sakes. Some high-ranking officers of the Nazis were interred there. To find record-keeping of that nature, then it became a ward, a cycle of American soldiers, even enemy soldiers, which were battle-fatigued and deemed to be, under psychotic need. It was basically a psychic hospital from 1946 to 1950. Then it was turned into this Indian training school.
Well, that's the way that often, it's interesting, actually, Henry Kissinger got his first job was working in counterintelligence with the U.S. Army in Germany after the war to identify Germans who could be recruited into the CIA. And he brought a number of these guys, and that was his first job that got him public government recognition, that he went into the German prison camps and identified people who'd work with the MK Ultra program and that. So, it's not accidentally that a German military camp would then be used as a means to set up these experimental programs and that.
Well, yeah, the MO is amazing. Then again, to have my friend come out with what he saw, and just he was so overwhelmed, he just couldn't wait to get out of the area. He said if it was 1, 2, or 3, spirits of children that he had witnessed, that's one thing. But he said there were over 100. And they were screaming for help to him. Wow. So there's definitely something going on there. If you look, ladies and gentlemen, if you just type in Google or even YouTube, Intermountain Financial School or Intermountain Indian School, Brigham City, you'll see a number of videos of people that have gone in there and recorded some shall we say poltergeist activity. It's well known in this neck of the woods as being very, very haunted. But just a little side note, by the way. These abandoned buildings, the infirmary, the hospital area especially, there's just something very heavy there, without a doubt.
Well, it's all over America and Canada, so it's the start of a new era where we're actually uncovering these things and not just seeing it as something in the past. This is an ongoing indictment of our system, and that's why we want to go to international courts, and our tribunal is aimed at the government and churches responsible, so we can't hesitate anymore, to name this for what it is. Name the names.
Well, you're going up against a 800-pound gorilla. You got a real elephant in the room to use. They got all kinds of money. They've got all kinds of attorneys. I mean, the top attorneys in the world, really, in their employ. Golly, can David really slay this Goliath, Kevin?
Well, we already have. I mean, would never have thought that the government would have been forced in Canada to admit that half these children were dying, and they did that 3 years ago because of the pressure we're bringing to bear. The Prime Minister had to stand up in Parliament and admit that. Now, nothing came out of it, of course, the usual cover-up, and not one person has ever gone to trial in Canada for the death of a child in one of these schools. But their backs are to the wall on this. They're very defensive now, and the very fact that they're having to cover up so much of this and put such a media blackout on it shows how frightened they are of this stuff coming out. So I think we have the moral high ground, we have the truth on our side, and we have the numbers of people with us. Most people, once they learn this, want this stuff to be brought to justice. So that's what we're trying, and I'm confident. I've seen, I've lived this long through this, and I know that we're going to see some real shift. I've already seen it happen.
So, I guess you just wanted to stay for the first hour, but in the next few minutes, there's an interesting side note to this. There's many, many interesting side notes, but one of the stories that was witnessed, one of the royal house of Windsor was there. Was it the Queen or just who that came and was witnessed taking 11 children?
October 1964, the Queen and Prince Philip were in Canada at that time. Eyewitness saw them take 10 children from the Kamloops Catholic School in British Columbia, and these kids never came back. The eyewitness to it was going to come to Europe and testify, and then he died suddenly in a hospital in Vancouver when he was pretty healthy. So I mean, I don't doubt that eyewitnesses are being killed over this stuff, but it does indict the royal family, the so-called royal family in the Crown of England, and that's one of the reasons we don't rely on the courts in Canada, because they're under an oath of allegiance to these people. We need international action on this, and this is one of the reasons.
Well, you look at what's going on now in this Sandusky and Penn State child molestation case. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just put this out there. What we're talking about here is 1,000 times more traumatic and evil than anything Sandusky and Penn State could ever accomplish. I mean, come on, wake up. Where's the outrage? Where's the outrage of what's going on here? As bad as Sandusky and the Penn State.
Focus on individuals is like Sandusky is to make it seem that, this terrorizing of children and the rape of children is somehow just an individual problem. The reality is that child trafficking and everything is tolerated and it's a very lucrative industry. There's a policy in the Roman Catholic Church that this Pope, Ratzinger, helped to write, and it says if a child is harmed or raped by a priest, the priest and bishop are ordered, under pain of excommunication, to cover that up and not tell the police. That's a policy coming right out of Rome. So this is not simply the result of bad individuals. This is a whole mindset and policy coming out of the biggest corporation in history, the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican. And, it percolates down, as you mentioned, to many other churches and institutions, but you've got to cut off the head of this beast, and not just worry about the tentacles. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, looking at the Talmud, I posted some of these links on my website. The Sanhedrin chapters of the Talmud lay out the law that it's totally okay, and that's the system in society for pederasty to occur up to age 9 years in a day. Now, come on. Either it's right or it's wrong. I don't care whether it's a synagogue or an Anglican Church of England, okay? It's got to be exposed. And the tentacles, I think, of all of this go out to one central head. And it's either right or it's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. Truth is truth. Facts are facts. If we ever hope to get the blessings of God, the real true blessings, we've got to stand for the children. We've got to.
Yeah. That's what it comes down to, very much.
Yeah.
That's our future. Yep.
Well, Kevin, the hour's gone by very, very fast. I know you're very busy and got a lot of obligations, so thank you so very much for coming on the show today. Hopefully you'll come on again in the future and
I sure will.
Give us updates. I'm sure there's more, and I really want to meet you and walk with you on the grounds of this fun Intramountain Indian School.
Well, we'll try to set it up for January or February when I'm down in the States, and we'll be in touch by email. I'd be happy to come on soon to give you more updates as we have these bones analyzed. But just to remind people again, itccs.org and hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com. Let's stay in touch.
Yes, is there any, again, you're operating on a shoestring budget here. Is there any place where people can donate that they feel to help out?
Well, we've had a PayPal account. It keeps getting taken down all the time, but by who knows who. But if you write to me, we can arrange that just to hiddenfromhistory1@gmail.com, and we can arrange. We have a way to do that. Thank you.
Well, golly, it takes money to travel. It takes money to, again, since you've been taken out of your collar, so to speak, you've been excommunicated. Have you been excommunicated or just?
Well, they took away my right to practice within the church. I'm still a community minister. I do a lot of work. I just not through the church, which is fine. But I wouldn't go back into these churches anyway, even if they invited me and admitted they were wrong. Morally, I couldn't. But no, I do. Everything is self-funded from people on the ground, so it would help a lot if people were able to help that way.
Kevin Annett's been my guest, ladies and gentlemen. His website, simply ICCS.org, and hiddennolonger.com. What a great name, what a great website, what a great mission. Kevin, you have my support 100%. God bless you, sir.
Thank you. God bless you too, brother. Thank you.
Be safe. Be safe. We'll keep in touch. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a break. We'll come back at the top of the hour with America's favorite game show, American Jeopardy, and more on Pearl Harbor events going on around the country. Be well. We'll be right back. Don't go away.